your executive summary piece to the project that you'll turn in when you start your project or your presentation next time. That needs to be basically a one-page summary, okay? 2 maybe, depending on your book, but just be as succinct as possible in how you just kind of summarize the book, okay? I don't want necessarily an outline with bullet points on these are the 14 topics or the 8 steps or the this or that. Just kind of summarize, if you can, in narrative form, just, the summary of the book. Now, here's a couple of things also. Remember, part of your presentation is, and part of your grade is based on 2 things. One, it's your participation in the group, so there'll be that piece that you'll bring with you. Remember, we gave those out last time, the group member evaluation form things. So when you come that night to do presentations, already have that done. You'll turn that in. You'll turn the summary in. I've seen this done in a variety of ways, and I'm not trying to point you in a different direction, but some groups will have handouts for the class, to go through. Some will do these other things. Whatever you deem as a deliverable for your group, make sure there's at least a copy for me and Linda, and maybe Nancy if she's here too. That way we can at least follow along, okay? But whatever's in the syllabus is what's expected, the summary, and then it's your presentation, and however you decide to do that in a creative way is great. Remember, the other point is, this whole presentation, the idea is that none of us have time to read all these books right now. They may be something we want to get to in the future, but after the 20 to 25 minutes of your group presentation and then the Q&A that comes at the end of that, so in your 30-minute block with this book, everyone should feel like they know the book. Maybe not all the ins and outs, but they should have a really good idea and have some takeaways that they can say, hey, there's this book called Influencers, and it's got these points in it, I heard about that. It kind of makes some sense. It's got to be something that everybody can use, okay? And on the other side, we as listeners, we're going to get the chance to hear about some really good books, some different thoughts, similar to all these things we've been talking about. But so we're going to sit and listen and participate in the Q&A and do all that. And then after a night, we're going to have a lot more knowledge and ideas in our toolkit to go forward. That's the whole idea. Okay? Yeah, Kevin. Colin.
Do we lead the Q&A as the presenters?
Well, there will be, it'll kind of be a variety. It'll be Linda and I maybe asking some questions. It may be the audience. I would hope that the audience, you all will ask questions. Clarify this for me. Tell me more about this. That's where you prove there's another angle to help you prove that you read, comprehend, understood all the book and kind of the ideas. Is that helpful? Okay, so here we are to the action, to the models, to the place where most people start. We are just now getting here after all these hours and hours of talking and reading and thinking and dreaming about, dreaming about change, right? So we're going to talk about this for a little bit. Kotter is something we'll talk about with a little depth because that's something you've all read at this point. I would hope you've all read that. The paper is due tomorrow. If not, you have a very exciting Saturday night ahead of you. But that's not the only model. So hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. And by hopefully, I mean hopefully this isn't just lecture. We're going to do some more discussion and stuff. But I'm struggling. So we're going to try to get through this. Everything in change, in the change world, the study of change, all these models, all these things we've talked about, these 8 steps or 6 steps or these steps or whatever, this plan of action is based off of the ideas that come from a man named Kurt Lewin. Okay, I think in the Hickman book, I'm trying to remember which chapter or whatever, but there's a piece in this book that kind of talks about Lewin a little bit in terms of kind of his background and stuff. But he's kind of known as the the father of change. Not actual change, but the father of the study of change, okay? And his model for change is what basically all these other models that we'll encounter in our today, but also in our study of change, or as you are so inspired by this topic, you read more and more about it after you finish your master's and all that. They're all based off of his three-step model, okay? And basically his three steps can be boiled down to as simply as possible is you have something in your organization and your grouping of people, this whatever it may be, that you unfreeze. Okay? The idea of you unfreeze it, you change it, and then you refreeze it. It's the new norm. It's the new story. Okay? So most everything is based off this idea. There's something going on. It's kind of stuck here. You unfreeze it. Here it goes. We're going to change it. We're going to freeze it again. It's the new norm, okay? It's a pretty basic idea, 3 steps. That's kind of where everything comes from. And what's crazy to me is that in the academic world, so Lewin's not somebody whose, philosophies were around in the, way back days. This was, in the 50s, basically. That nobody had even looked at this stuff. How does this work? It hadn't even become this academic discussion until in the 50s and 60s. And so one of the reasons all these organizations that have existed over time have struggled with change is because nobody was really looking at it. Nobody was really looking at it. They were trying to put lots of names and lots of things together to kind of make sense of how to just get through their day in these programs and projects or whatever it is they wanted to start. So until Lewin came around, nobody even looked at the ideas of change. And so we have him to blame for all this stuff going on in our head over the last couple weeks. Kotter's 8-step model. Like I told you way back at the beginning, this is not the end-all, be-all. It doesn't fit every situation. But in terms of what's out there, what's available to us, especially when we're talking, remember, about planned change, okay? His model is the one that most people find the most value in, because his model is based on a variety of factors that just kind of make sense, okay? It doesn't always fit, but if you look at changes that have been successful in a variety of ways, and he's been looking at it for a long time. I think the original version of the book you read, I think it was 96. I think it was 96, but he had been writing about it before then. But even in the later editions, this is not somebody who is, he keeps it revising and stuff, but the steps don't change. And he said this is why the steps don't change, because these are the things that you can boil down all this stuff back into. Now he's a master at repackaging these ideas and selling them. So when I say Kotter, if this was a conference somewhere full of people who studied leadership at the highest levels of academia, some people will roll their eyes because they see it as it's become so popularized, so marketable in terms of it's on the shelves at Barnes & Noble or whatever. Or you can see that he's written other books called like A Sense of Urgency. Well, that's the first step, right? Well, let me write a whole book on that. He wrote one called Our Iceberg is Melting. Some of you have seen that one. He wrote one, I think, What Leaders Really Do. Linda told me last class that she had seen something where you can buy all 5 pieces of the Kotter package for, on sale for $89.95 or something. And so while he works at Harvard and he teaches and he's an academic, he's also really good at the other side of it. So when I say all this, you're not going to offend me if you say, that doesn't work, he's just making money on it. Because the traditional academic types would agree with you, but they haven't found anything better either. That's the problem with Kotter. That's why everybody uses Kotter. Okay? Not in terms of every organization, but that's kind of where everybody starts the conversation. Does that make sense? So when I say this is the go-to book, it's not because it's the Bible or the right way to do this all the time. It's a guidepost and a fundamental, basic grouping of ideas that we as leaders of change, we're crazy to not look at it in terms of these steps. Okay? You'd kind of be a little bit silly to have gone through all the process of identifying what needs to be changed, who all's involved, the context, and then when it gets time to how are we going to do this, you'd be a little bit, it wouldn't be wise to not think about these 8 steps at least. There may be other things to consider, but we've got to look at some of this. So tell me a little bit. You've all read, most of you have probably written these wonderful papers that I will read beginning, not tonight, but tomorrow. And so tell me a little bit about what you think of Kotter's model. Some of you have already shared in conversations and other things, but as a group, what are we thinking about this stuff, these 8 steps?
Laura, would you like to share with us?
Oh, you already know my opinion. I think it's a great framework and a great set of steps, but I think my criticism was, or my concern was that change doesn't always happen in such a linear process.
Sure.
And that I think that sometimes organizations become so dedicated to the step-by-step process that they lose some of the spontaneous ability to go with another change or something that arises right then that they couldn't have foreseen when they were evaluating all potential outcomes.
Sure. I knew that was your opinion. I didn't know if everybody else knew your opinion on that. No, that's good. That's what we're here to do, is share opinions. So of these 8 steps, because we know your opinion on this, where have you seen this fall apart? Aside from being most changes not, or a lot of changes not just this linear plan change stuff. Is there one of these steps that you have more issue with than others, or is it just in general? And I'm not trying to pick on you. I'm trying to have a conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I've seen it happen when the guiding coalition, which is a step that I do really like, doesn't happen properly.
Sure.
And that the guiding coalition doesn't either takes into account, it's all made up of senior management or it's all made up of employees. And both of those extremes don't seem to work well. With Kotter's model, you should have enough power to affect the change, enough power to lead the change, but input from all members, all people who will be involved in doing the change. That's not really something that's all together. Fall apart.
Sure.
And I didn't see it as much linearly. Maybe that's because of the other book I'm reading that has it. You know, I think the first 4 steps are kind of the warm-up. You've got to set those, and then after that, different parts of the change can happen, and they could be in different parts of the other 5, 6, 7, and 8 at different times. So those things can happen non-linearly, but I think I saw it as kind of, man, you got to set your foundation, and then after that, and some of that in Change the World that our group's reading, they talk about how, you know, once you set it, then you could be in, you know, stage 6 on one thing, stage 8 on another, stage 4 on another.
And maybe it's the number of steps, because I had the DICE concept with the 4 steps, was a little bit, seemed like it combines maybe the first 3 or 4, well, really the first 3 steps, and then we have the implementation afterwards, but maybe just the fact that there's 8.
Sure.
And trying to move, I mean, I'm just saying, moving an entire group through 8. Are we now officially finished with step 1? Let's check the box.
Sure.
You know, great, it might become that. Have we finished with step 2? Everyone is agreement, check the box.
What else comes to your mind based on Kotter's 8 steps?
It also talks about how you're sometimes at different steps in the change process, there may be more than one sense of urgency, so there could be duplication and you're not saying it the way I want to right now.
So, I think I told you when I first came to class yesterday, I was like, I don't really like to cook, but.
I seem to remember something about it.
Something like that. But, so to give balance to it, he has some really great points. And one of my favorites is.
You have 8 of them?
No, that's my point. So, one of the points is that he talks about the highly visible leader. I believe that this is a very dangerous concept to think of that. I'm huge on, it's a team thing, you know, it's not a me thing, you know, so, I really, really like that. My issue is kind of similar to Laura's in that, I don't think, have anyone ever heard of examples of the enemy of understanding? You might have heard that phrase before, okay. So think about it.
That's the book you can write.
Well, yeah, still from the teacher that I had. Examples of the enemy of understanding, I really do believe that. If you give someone an example, then they try to follow that example. And that's what these 8s and 4s are all about. They're trying to replicate something. And scientifically, that's what we like to do. We like to do something that's replicable and then send it out to the world and say, just do this and duplicate it and you'll have the same success I did. But when we're talking about people, change, you know, you've got to be savvy. You've got to be able to work within, you know, what you said that the worm that's inside of glue, his world is glue. Somebody said something about that? Sauerkraut? Yeah.
That wasn't me.
It wasn't you? I'm telling you, I get some
I think that was
information
Black.
coming at me. But yeah, whatever thing is that's inside of this, that's what their world is. They have to work within that framework. And that's where I think Influencers is such a great book because it's not telling you you got to do it this way, this way.
Sure.
You do. It's incredible. Yeah. So it's just about working within your framework, you know, and setting up the things that need to happen to help the people help themselves. Sorry. But yeah, so great point. He says, you know, the highly visible person is not the best model. Actually, he says very dangerous to think that way. And I think it's just more about working within the framework you're in, you know.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Yeah.
One thing I found interesting, and maybe it's because I'm in an organization that's changing, but it says that they should not spend millions on education during attempts at major change, and that attitude training is often just as important as skills training. And I just thought that was interesting because we had a meeting last week, and it was like, okay, we kind of need to do this, you guys don't know, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, like, I guess you don't always look at the attitude because you're so focused on, oh, they don't have this skill. They might already have it, and they can have that skill, but if their attitude towards the change is still wrong, then it's not really going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, it's kind of about the stuff we talked about last night. I think last night, motivation, organizational commitment. You know, a lot of these authors will say the same types of things. Some of them may throw a wild card in there every now and then. But there's value in that's why we do graduate work, so we can expose ourselves to a variety of thoughts so we can better come to our own understanding based on some relevancy and some data and some, you know, legitimacy of what people have done before, not because if we just replicate what they've done it'll work, but because maybe what they did might spark some ideas for us that might work for us. So that's why we do all this right here. What else about Cotter?
It's just not reality, in my opinion. I appreciate the steps, and I was just trying to find my paper, but I've gone through probably all of them, probably more of the error steps that are pointed out than the progressive steps that work. But what got me on the wrong side of the law was the fact that he emphasized so much. I was not saying that literally, just figuratively. Any police in it? No. His constant reminder of how long it takes to achieve the viable change, the viable organizational change ingrained in culture. And I found that to be put-offish and almost defeatist to what I believe he's trying to accomplish with these very strategic steps. I understand he's trying to get reality into this too, And I felt he could have put more management in alongside with the leadership principles and the tasks that he lays out, kind of cohabitating. But the time factor was kind of discouraging to somebody who might read this and say, geez, really? I go through these steps, but you're talking years or decades in some cases. So,
I see a lot of computers. If everyone who has a computer or a smartphone or some way to access, if you don't, that's okay. Everyone get on the old Google. You are given access, and some of you are already there. Get off Facebook, get on Google. Google change strategies. I'm sorry. Models of change. Models of organizational change. Organizational change models. Something like that.
5,150,000 results.
Yeah,
What are some of the first ones that you see?
just go to Accenture.
3 types of change
I've got that
management
too,
models.
3 sets of change.
Potter's eight
Potter's
step
eight
change,
step.
Lewin's
Lewin's change management.
theories and models of organizational change, models of organizational change, a quick primer. Just keeps going.
Wharton Leadership Development.
So those are the ones we should do with models.
Seeing those.
You can be a leader in 6 easy steps.
No way.
That's hilarious.
Take easy steps.
Right.
For 1995.
Yeah.
See, that's what-
Okay, here's my point, and you already know this point, and Laura framed it for us earlier. There are a million steps that all say almost the same thing. Somebody's repackaged the idea that Kotter has kind of fleshed out into 8 steps. There are always people trying to take it into 3 steps or 4 steps or 6 steps or whatever. Don't get lost in Kotter for the sake of the steps or the number of steps or this doesn't work or this doesn't work like this. Remember, our role in this is to lead others through change. We have to make sure they understand why it's important to move from a place of comfort, from a place of known certainty, known circumstances. We have to move people from that place to another place. So we have to create a sense of urgency. We can't do it alone, right? Everybody recognizes that. We've kind of come this far. Hopefully we know that we have to include downstream leaders and implementation leaders. We have to include the folks that are going to be on the front lines. We have to include the ones that are going to be at all levels of the group, the organization, your board, your nonprofit, the community, outreach, volunteer network, whatever it is. You have to include people in the process, right? There has to be a pretty picture somewhere to describe what it is we're going towards, right? And does anybody argue with that? There has to be a depiction, a description, a vivid drawing so people can imagine a better tomorrow and why we would ever move from where we are, right? We have to communicate that change. Several times in the last couple weeks, we've talked about the ideas of what it means to be a leader. You threw out all these words. Communication was a big one. Most of which probably because in your experiences, many times you don't feel like you were communicated with. We have to make sure that we understand there is a need for communication. Whether we're the one at the top of the food chain at the organization or we're in the middle who has to implement it, we have to communicate. We have to bring others into the idea that it's okay to work for this. It's okay to put effort towards this. You can do it if you try. If not, we're going to get you the training and the help you need. We're going to provide the resources and support. We're going to empower you to do the things that need to be done in order to see this change happen. Right? We're going to make some progress along the way. We're gonna have moments in there where we celebrate the progress we've made along the way. We're gonna take stock of what we're doing along the way. We're not just gonna leave you today and see you next year. Hope this works out for you. We're gonna take stock along the way. We as leaders need to do that. We're gonna celebrate when we accomplish small goals, because we have to refill vision buckets. We have to remind people why we're doing this. Whether this is a month-long process or a year-long process or a complete transformation of an organization, we got to remind people, we got to celebrate along the way, and then the new story has to become the norm. And so it has to be institutionalized. So Kotter's not wrong, right? Kotter's not wrong. It may not flow very cleanly because organizations are messy. They're still messy, right? Because people are involved. So we're not going to go into the 1,000 other models that you would go into if you were doing this, for a literature review for dissertation or something like that, because that's exhausting. Because they all end up saying pretty much the same thing. So I hope Kotter can be a tool, a piece to the puzzle for you as a model. But there's other models out there, and so we need to talk a little bit about which model or strategy. And strategy is a different word than model. Model implies these are steps, follow this pyramid, follow this circle, graph, whatever it may be. A strategy, as the research has increased in the field of organizational change and leadership, there's been so many change methods and processes and strategies that have emerged from the literature. And it's good to have something that's so new in terms of an understanding as an academic discipline, because people are still discovering things. Even though I say everything kind of goes back to these 8 steps or Lewin's 3 steps, people are still trying to learn this and understand it because it is so hard and so difficult. So there's all these strategies out there, and there's differing opinions on how do you pick which one. There's a book I have in my office. I don't bring it because it's too big. It's like this big, okay? It's called The Change Handbook. Sometime look that up if you have interest, and you can see, I don't know how many examples of change models and strategies, okay? Some of them work really well with some situations. Some of them would work better with others. If you get into a place in your career, in your place as a volunteer, to where you are constantly leading change, planned change, as we call it, or you find yourself in these moments where, hey, the 8 steps aren't working, maybe there's another way, I would highly recommend the Change Handbook. It is, it's really detailed, and it goes in a wide variety of directions. Some are very, very kind of new ageist ideas. Everybody sits around the room and talks about all the good things going on versus we don't ever say anything negative anymore for this month. I mean, it gets really new agey in some ways, but in other ways it's very practical, very pragmatic, very purposeful. The people who wrote that book suggested these 7 steps, and there's 3 authors, Holman, Devane, and Katie, and this book was written in 2007, The Change Handbook. How do we choose? We got to think about the purpose. The change agent or the leadership must first identify the aim and focus of the change. So when we pick a model or use a strategy, we have to look at the purpose of the change, okay? We have to think about what type of system we're involved with. Is this going to affect the system as a whole immediately? Is it going to affect one department more than others? Is it going to affect everybody equally day one? Is it going to start over here and then it gets handed off to this department and then we have to worry about how it's implemented over here? I mean, you got to look at the system. The event size. How big is this? What's the magnitude? And these are, this is, you can talk about the dice. You can talk about some of these other things. This is another way to look at it. how big is the group involved in this process? Is it our entire organization, or is it our leadership team? Or is it this department? Or is it the administrative assistants? Or is it the fill in the blank? How big is the group involved? The duration, just like with Quinn, Quinn, how long is this going to take place? I mean, what's the duration? The cycle. The cycle is some way to look at to determine the cycle of change linked to the particular change. The leader must observe whether the change cycle needs to be as needed. Are we going to change as needed? Are we going to continually implement change into our organization of some kind? But we do it strategically. Then also we have to make sure those that are going to be involved in leading the change, which is, from our perspective here, it's you. How are you as the change agent, the leader of the change, how are you being prepared to lead this change? Have you gone back to your notes? Have you got those things out of the trash can? Or whatever it may be. You never, that's right. Have you thought about change since that one class you had 10 years ago? I mean, seriously, how are you prepared to lead the change? How are you gearing up as the leader who ultimately holds the responsibility for this and that? How are you preparing yourself to be the practitioner of change, right? And then what are the special resources that are needed? Is it more money? Is it more people? Is it new equipment? Is it new technology? Is it new marketing? Idea? Those kinds of things. So as we look at different strategies for change, it's important that we kind of look at these ideas in terms of picking which one. Okay? There's a whole, like I said, there's a whole bunch of them. Some of the ones that are most popular that you will have probably seen, whether you knew it was called this or not. We're not going to go into these in detail because we're going to spend more time on the last one. These are some of the more common ones. Appreciative inquiry. Anybody know what that is? Anybody heard of that? I think we had some of that in our Hickman book. Maybe I don't know. I read too much this week, just like you did. Appreciative inquiry. This is something that is really, it's a good model. It's a good strategy for change. Somebody, one, because I'm losing my voice really bad, somebody get on Wikipedia or something, do appreciative inquiry, and share kind of the gist. If there's a summary or something. Sorry, I can't. We're going to make it through this. Appreciative inquiry.
A method for studying and changing social systems, groups, organizations, communities that advocates a collective inquiry into the best of what is in order to imagine what could be. And English may be different like this. Followed by collective design of a desired future state that is compelling and thus does not require the use of incentives, coercion, persuasion for planned change to occur.
Basically, this is when a team, an organization, a group of people comes together and they talk about these are the things we do really well. We're not going to talk about the things that are not going as well. This is what we do really well. Let's do more of what we do really well. There's something psychologically that comes when you focus on the positive, right? We don't ignore the realities that come and the negatives and all that, but for these moments where appreciative inquiry is a part of the conversation, and this idea of change is you come together and you talk about what we do really well, and then you inspire to move towards doing more of what we do really well. This program is going really good. We're making a major difference in the community. How can we do more of that? How can we change what we're doing in order to do more of that? Let's raise more money. Let's do more for this because I think this can work. We're already doing it well. It's proving it's working. Let's focus on this. Okay? I mean, that change comes because of moments like that too. It's not just painting the picture of what has, the negatives of reality. It could be painting the picture of, hey, this is where we're hitting our goals. This is where we're doing what we set out to do when we started this nonprofit. This is how we're making a difference in people's lives. How can we move forward and do more of that? What do we need to change in order to do more of that? And then that leads into some really neat group discussions on the design of a new future.
Yeah, Quinn touches on it in Change the World book, talking about how do you touch the positive core. And he's got 4 steps, but they're just written in kind of a more uplifting way.
Sure.
They talk about discovery, dream, design, and destiny. Which, you know, those are all motivating,
Sure.
positive words.
Sure. And there's a moment in there where we as leaders, and I feel like maybe even in this class we've talked so much about some of the heartache of change, some of the negativity, because we have to think about the realities. Okay, we have to. But part of it, this is a really good tool. Appreciative inquiry is a great strategy, especially for somebody who wants to go in and be an encouragement, but knows there needs to be something done too. Okay, maybe there's not these obvious fires that have to be put out. Maybe we're doing some things well, but we're not hitting on all cylinders, but we're doing some good things. Let's keep focusing.
It strikes a chord with me thinking about board members, especially, or even senior leadership,
Sure.
where they have something that we're doing this really well, and perhaps they don't have a full understanding of all the work that's taking place. And I've been in conversations where board members have said we need to do more of that, where I know fully that we need to do a lot of other things as well. And so I think there is a tendency with appreciative inquiry to move forward with a pet project rather than something that
Sure.
may be more fundamental to the mission moving forward. So
Sure.
I think there's a caveat that comes along with that.
Exactly. With all these strategies, there's a time and a place. And there's a moment in your organization where it may not fit. But there are organizations that probably need more of that than some of the other strategies, because all they hear about is, we got to cut another, or the budget's getting cut again, or we're having to lay off people. If this new project doesn't work, or this new product isn't very good, you know, we may all be looking for new. I mean, there's so much of that in the world that people who've done this at the right time, the right place, have seen a lot of added growth, development, and just inspiration in their group. So people go off and get certified in appreciative inquiry. There are people you can bring into your organization that are really good at facilitating that, to where it's not just about the good, and let's do more good. It's about the good and let's do more good, but let's also recognize that there is a place where we may have to do another approach and take a look at something else. Environmental scanning, we talked a little bit about earlier. That is a change strategy, considered a change strategy. Okay? Most of you, the SWOT is what you're familiar with. We did the spell it this morning. We won't go into some of those other things. I highly recommend you looking at some of these just to see, just to expose yourself to more of that. But we are going to talk a little bit about storytelling. Okay? Storytelling as a change strategy. What is it about stories? What is it about stories that are powerful to you?
Just bring it down to a personal level. The use of metaphors or stories or pictures, just make it more understandable.
Sure. Sure.
More visual, yeah, it's the visual part that means being able to picture what they're saying. That was when Malcolm Gladwell was speaking, that was like
Sure.
painting the picture was something I could actually see.
It's more memorable,
Sure.
really grab onto the concepts behind it.
So what an example today would be when Muhammad shared his story about the cab. It was 2 minutes long. Every one of you was captured in that, right? Every one of you probably, if it hadn't already come to pass, would have probably jumped on board to help him, right? I mean, Some of you may not have a heart, but that, I'm just kidding. So story is powerful. Story is how our mind works for the most part. Now, there are people who deal in, their mind works a little bit different. Maybe it is numbers, maybe it is, all these different things, data. But most people respond in story. Okay? So 8 principles, yes, 8 principles that govern efforts to stimulate desire for change. If you're, I know, I sense it, I feel it. I'm going to have a complex anytime I say it the rest of my life. There's these 8 principles that you can hopefully see on the screen that govern the efforts to stimulate a desire for change. Okay, earlier we talked about the motivation, people's organizational commitment, all these different things. The underlying idea should be worthwhile for its own sake. If you're really going to move people, if you're really going to change something, the idea has to be worthwhile. The communication tool must make that idea memorable. Somebody said memorable. The idea must be the audience's own idea. This is what this means, okay? When you tell a story, when you hear a speaker, when you hear a speech, when you hear Muhammad earlier today or something else, when you hear a story, you put yourself into that story. A lot of times you'll put yourself into that story, and whatever it is, the point of that may be, if you're strategic in storytelling, if you're the one telling the story, you put yourself into you want it to be where people put themselves into the role to where on the other side of that story, they're right there with you. It's their idea too. It's their story. Whether they knew it was or not, but going forward, it is. The audience needs room to contribute. Good storytellers don't give all the details. They let the audience's mind kind of go into places to where if they're listening and if they're really engaged, they're also thinking of how they fit into this. And maybe immediately there's other characters that pop up. Maybe there's other people, or maybe it's a place. The story's very generic, but maybe it's your hometown. Maybe it's the inner city where you worked when you were in high school, or where you knew kids that grew up, or whatever it is that the story is. You want people to be able to contribute in their mind, especially. The idea needs to be positive for the most part. And it needs to be positive for that audience. You don't go in and tell some story about how great this change is going to be to the room full of people that are going to all be fired. I mean, some of you are like, well, that'd be dumb. It happens. I mean, believe it or not, things happen. Somebody gets up January 2nd, it's a new year, this is our new vision. By the end of this year, we're going to have so much more money because we're going to be much more efficient. We're going to be outsourcing all these things. And then you catch somebody's eye and they're like, what are you outsourcing? My job. That's not good. But that happens. People don't think about it. The most useful communication tools tend to be stories. Communication tools in general are effective when they generate what we've been talking about today, a new story in the mind of each listener. Think about some of the great leaders in our history. Gandhi, Jesus, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, you name the person, and chances are good, most of them had a really good ability to tell stories. But most of them also didn't just tell stories to tell stories. They were very strategic. How many of you have ever heard somebody get up to give a speech and they told a story and you're like, what is going on with that? Right? Some of you are saying, you told one earlier about an airplane, Peyton. But the idea is that we want to be strategic in our storytelling, okay? So we're not going to dive into this all the way because, some of you already know this was where my dissertation was spent, so I can dive way too deep. But the idea is that stories empower a speaker. And let's think of it this way. Stories empower a leader, okay? And they create an environment so that they can catch the listener's attention. When you go to the mandatory all-employee meeting that nobody wants to go to, and everybody's got a million other things they want to do, and you know they're not going to get you together to tell you they're giving you a bonus or whatever the situation may be. But they are going to, and they know they're going to announce a change. You know your audience, you got to grab their attention somehow, right? And you got to use it as a platform for learning and build a relationship. Stories are a great way to predetermine the information, to control the message. Okay? That's immensely valuable in your role as a leader of change. If you can use stories to control the message, stories about why this change is going to be good, stories about the impact that this change will have on whoever it is you serve, their life, their children, whatever it may be. If you can tell stories and control the message, you can also start to move people mentally into these places that maybe they wouldn't have gone as easily if you just went up there and said, we're going to have 83% growth next year. That's our goal. Here we go. Well, why? Tell me a story. Why? What difference does that make? Okay? Stories are utensils or tools for thinking. Stories from the past that have gone on in your organization can be joined together with a new story or the current story to help establish associations. Do y'all remember when we went through this as a team in 2008? In 2008, people didn't know if anybody would leave home to go to college anymore, right? Because the economy was so bad, so everybody was going to commute. But we came together and we started new programs, and we started all these new institutes, and now here we are on the other side. Not only did they come, we have more students. We came through it because we changed some things. But they don't have to be these long, drawn-out stories, right? You can bring connections to the past. And before you can influence someone, you must establish some connection. And story is a great way to build connections between you and those you wish to influence. The best speakers, the best keynoters, the best of the best, they've got you early on because they're good storytellers. But hear this also, you don't have to be the world's greatest storyteller to have an influence. There's other ways to tell stories, but it is a great tool for going forward. So the stories you tell to promote change can be cast into these however many numbers of points there are. I don't know. Looks like 8. 8 is good. It's the number of the day. They need to be action-oriented. Okay? They need to promote action, describe action. They need to be stories that will encourage people to move. Okay? They're not stories of how we are going to stay the same. They're not just stories because every speech 101 class says, do an attention getter at the first. Tell us a funny joke or a story. Okay? Be action-oriented. Link the listeners to the values that are shared. Whether it's the cultural values that are assumed in your organization, if it's the 3 of you that are trying to start this nonprofit around the table, okay, y'all remember why we started this? Remember when we met Sally, and she didn't have what she needed to be successful in life, and it broke our hearts. We heard her story, and so we started this group. Remember when we volunteered to work with the children whatever it may be, these shared sets of values and purpose. Another important thing, we talked about in terms of change, the cast of who's involved, but in your stories, you got to cast the organization's people as characters. Okay? Cast the people in your organization as characters. Tell a good story about somebody that will resonate with your audience. If you have a group of 200 employees in the room and you're announcing this big change or whatever it is that you're doing or in whatever group, if you can make it more real, to people. Use real names as best you can, in whatever setting it is you're in. Use real examples. This one's a little bit tricky, but cast the competition as the antagonist. Doesn't mean you go out and bash the other competition, but you may have to inspire your people by saying, hey, Coke, Pepsi's doing this. We know the competition's out there. They're not quitting. They're not sitting around not doing something about it. You don't have to bash them. I'm not into that. But you may have to use them as a placeholder in your story to help prove a point, right? You want to portray the past as a prologue to a new story. Okay? This is where we've been. That's our history. Now here we go. Okay? Here we go forward. This change is going to take us into the new chapter of our organizational life. You got to portray the present as the beginning of a quest. People love quests, the epic, the adventure. And some of the most popular movies that have ever existed are these movies that come from these books that are like this, right? Because there's a quest, there's an adventure, there's this feeling that when we begin this, we're going to achieve this on the other side of all this adventure. Tell stories about that. Portray the future as this place where goals are accomplished and renewed, where we're going to be a better version of who it is we said we would be way back when we started this thing. Tell stories about that. Some of the best storytellers in organizations are the ones that tell the future story, right? And they leave you hanging. The Paul Harvey approach, if you remember that guy.
Good day.
Yeah. The rest of the story. Maybe you frame it as, this is the impact our organization is making. Then you come back and say, well, this is in 20 years. We want to be making this. And people are ready to go. Because that's how their mind works. We're not talking about manipulating people. We're talking about motivating people and inspiring people, because we know the people are the key to the change.
Yeah, how their hearts work.
And their hearts, that's right. Okay, at your tables, let's do something here. These are from a woman named Annette Simmons. These are types of stories for influence. Take a look at this list. There's only 6 of them. The who I am stories. These are stories about purpose. These are stories about our mission. These are stories about who we are, why we're here. No, that's the next one. The why am I here stories. Why does your organization exist? What's the story there? And there's the vision story, right? That's the grand picture. That's a lot of times the fun one to draw or to dream about. That's a major story. There's stories that need to be told in your organizations about teaching moments, teachable moments, right? Where your organization can come together, they can learn from each other based on the stories of people that are around or people who have been through this before. Teaching stories. Some of the ones we use in a place like Lipscomb, a lot of these values in action stories. Okay, this would be, we teach our students, our undergrads go through especially this SALT program. Do we have anybody who went through that as undergrad here? I don't know if anybody went here for undergrad. Did anybody go here for undergrad? Just a few of you? Well, we've got this SALT program, this serving and learning together program. I don't know how old it is. It may just be around a couple years, I don't know. But we're sending our students into all these places into the community because here we are as this faith-based institution that talks about character and citizenship and integrity and living out your values. Well, we've got a boatload of stories about how that has impacted the community here in Nashville, but also our students, how they've learned how to put their values into action. So those types of stories need to exist in your organization for whatever it is your organization values. And then there's sometimes a need for these I know what you're thinking stories. Okay, those are the ones that kind of get summarized in ways like, brought you all back together. I know what you're thinking. Here we go again. We're going to, say the stock market were to drop 1,000,000 points tomorrow, Monday. None of us would be happy about that. But in your organization, somebody's going to bring you together. Okay, I know you're all thinking, the world's about to end. It's all bad news. This is what we're doing. But you have to have some kind of ability to tell a story about and show empathy for what your people are going through. The Affordable Care Act stuff is a big deal. I think we talked about some last time. A lot of organizations don't know how to explain that, good or bad. Wherever you see that, it doesn't matter at this point. But if you don't bring people together and explain to them the story of how that impacts their health insurance in their organization, whether they're going to have it or not, whether it's going to cost them more or not, whatever the situation may be, you haven't shown that you understand, and then it's really hard to explain why you have to, like another institution did, lay off a lot of people and then blame that. Well, why? Nobody explained to us that this is what was going to happen. It's only been being talked about for 2 years, right? So, at your tables, this is what I'd like for you to do. There's only 4 of you at each table. Most of you come from different organizations. Kind of grab one of these stories. You can pick, kind of give, and we're going to do this for maybe 20 minutes, maybe 5 minutes apiece. Okay, think about what it is, and it can be for your organization that you work for now or the one that you're hoping to create. Kind of tell your organizational story in one of these kind of formats, okay, to your classmates. Can we do that? I know it's very generic and very broad, but kind of grab one of these. This is who we are. This is where we're going. This is why we're here. This is what we're going to be someday. Just practice. It's all just practice. Nobody's going to have it down pat unless you're a salesperson and you do this all the time. So take 5 minutes a person and tell some good stories. And then we'll address